Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kawabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. My latest book, Toshiden Theater, Bite-Sized Japanese Urban Legends Volume 1, is now out. If you've ever wanted a collection of short, bite-sized stories that you can zip through whenever you have a few minutes spare, then this is the book for you. Bringing you all sorts of Japanese urban legends you may or may not have heard of before, these creepy, odd and bizarre little tales will keep you entertained and no doubt thinking about them for quite some time to come. Toshiden Theater is available on Amazon right now, so do check it out and help support the show at the same time. This week, we're looking at some tales of creepy and potentially deadly hauntings. First up, a group of friends enjoys going on regular tests of courage, but this last one might have ended that for good. Why? Find out in The Jizo Statues. When you're walking alone at night, sometimes you suddenly get scared, right? What people do after that differs, but there are many who nervously turn around to check behind them. Now, if you turn around, you tend to look straight back, right? Meaning you're expecting to see a person there, so you look straight ahead at normal human height. But as for me, well, I do this on purpose, ever since I heard this story. This happened more than 10 years ago now, when I had just turned 18 and several of my friends were starting to get their car licenses. As such, we'd sometimes get together at night and suggest going for a drive somewhere. Alright, where should we go? Let's try a test of courage at a ghost spot. This became our regular course, you might call it, when we wanted to go for a drive. We visited all sorts of places together in 3 or 4 cars, making a racket wherever we went. I just saw a figure! No way! Shit, that's crazy! It always went a little something like that, and we had great fun. One night, I was hanging out with my friends at our usual spot. Then a guy, suddenly appeared, his face pale. Behind him was C, his girlfriend, who was crying and being held up by B, another girl. B's expression was also stiff and she was trembling as well. We waited until they all calmed down before we said anything, but A's hands were shaking so badly that he couldn't even light his own cigarette, so I did it for him. Once they finally calmed down, A started talking. So, we went out to do a test of courage. B heard about this new place at school, so we invited C to join us and the 3 of us went. Apparently it's a place with lots of Jizo statues. B said that while you're looking at them, their expressions change. So we shone a torch on each and every one as we looked at them. Anyway, we weren't there for that long before B whispered something to me. "Let's go home," she said. "Well, what's wrong?" I asked, but C silently grabbed my arm and dragged me back towards the car. Once we got there, B finally told me what was going on. "The Jizo statues. All of their expressions changed," she said. But that was impossible. I was looking at them too, and I didn't see anything. I would have noticed if they did, and I said as much to her. To tell you the truth, I came here earlier today too. And at that time, they were all smiling. I got chills. I mean, the statues I just saw, they all looked angry. Hearing that, I got goosebumps all over, but it seemed there was still more to A's story. At the time, C suddenly screamed and then dropped to the ground. My heart was pounding too, so badly that it almost hurt, and I was like, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I crouched next to her. "I'm here, don't worry. Everything will be just fine," I said. But she kept screaming, "No, no," and she pointed at something without lifting her head. Instinctively, I turned to look at what she was pointing at, but I really should have stopped myself. It was right above us. At first, I was unable to find it. It's strange, right? How your brain refuses to accept when it sees something unnatural. Even though I was seeing it with my own two eyes, I couldn't comprehend it. But before long, I started to recognize how strange it was. The telephone pole. Right on top of it, there was something stretching out to the side. Looking closer, it was a leg. A human leg from the thigh down. C had stopped crying by that point, but then she started crying again. It was like she'd lost her mind. Then B started crying too. We were too scared to go home, so we decided to spend the night here instead. Anyway, ever since that day, none of us have gone out on tests of courage ever again, and I make sure not to look up at night as well. In many cases, living spirits can be even more deadly than the regular dead kind, but finding out who they belong to can be quite tough. And the answer in this next story is quite the surprise. Find out why in The Truth of the Living Spirit. One day, I was at an open cafe with my fiancée Yuka. All names are aliases. Having a light lunch when suddenly her friend Haru-san came over. It was our first time meeting, but she had a rather tense expression on her face. Did she not think well of me? I did my best to introduce myself in a bright, cheerful manner, and she did the same. But still, her expression was tense. It seemed she was there to meet someone, but she decided to chat with us until that person arrived. It didn't take Yuka long to notice her expression as well, and she did her best to smooth things over. "He's actually quite funny, you know," she said, trying to play me up. "Look, there's something that's bothering me," Haru-san said, looking apologetic. She seemed to debate whether she should say anything, but when we both told her to spit it out, she relented. "Has anything been bothering you lately?" she asked me. "Like, has anything strange happened at home, or have you felt unwell?" "Huh? No, I can't say I've noticed anything like that." But there was something that was weighing on my mind. I don't know whether it was because she was so careless or not, but Yuka was often getting injured. She would trip over invisible things. She got covered in bruises she didn't know how she got, and sometimes she even fell off her bike for no good reason as well. Plus the trains and buses she used were often delayed, despite the fact there were no accidents making them run late. Although there were no major accidents, small misfortunes had been following Yuka around ever since we started dating. She didn't seem to mind this at all, but to me, she was someone important who was about to become my wife. As such, I told all of this to Haru-san, and she looked somewhat sad. "Whether you believe me or not is up to you, but I want you to believe me. I think you're possessed by something evil." Several people had told me this over the years, but I'd never had any scary experiences myself, so I never paid much attention to it. I liked strange and scary stories, but sorry, Haru-san. At the time, I really didn't believe her. "I think it's someone who's still alive," she said. "Oh yeah, I'm meeting with my sister Natsu today. She can see things better than I can." And until Natsu-san arrived, she told us about some of the strange things that had happened around the two of them. According to Haru-san, she could only vaguely sense something around me. Her sister, on the other hand, was somebody who was strongly connected not just to her 5 regular senses, but her 6th sense as well. In other words, her connection to the other side was strong. 20 or so minutes later, Natsu-san arrived. Haru-san called out to her, and the moment she saw us, her expression froze. I couldn't help but start to believe when I saw the look on her face. There was no way for the 3 of them to have organized this behind my back. Neither Yuka nor Haru-san were on their phones, and I invited Yuka out on a date just that morning, so there was no way they could have known in advance that we would be at that cafe. We only went in because we passed by it when I was hungry. Soon after Natsu-san sat down, Haru-san explained everything. Yuka held my hand, perhaps thinking I was depressed, but I hadn't expected that, and honestly, it made me kinda happy. "It's right next to you," Natsu-san said. "It's watching us from next to your face. That spirit, I think it's a living spirit. Are you sure you aren't?" "Nothing is troubling me. In fact, I'm so healthy it might be a little too much. I'm more worried about Yuka. This living spirit seems to be attacking those you are close to. The reason Yuka-san hasn't suffered a terrible accident yet is because of her own strong heart, but also the protection of her ancestors too. What a strange person. Not just Yuka-san herself, but the relatives protecting her as well. I think they put a lot of effort into protecting people while they were alive as well." "Hey, Natsu-chan, do you know who is possessing him?" Yuka asked. "He's not the type of person who would make others hate him." Living spirits tend to have a terrible image, but there are good ones as well. Like, if you have genuine feelings of affection for someone, then... But this one, yeah. Natsu-san fell silent for a moment before she continued. It seemed she was convinced of the same thing Haru-san was. "The thing possessing you is... yourself. Your hatred, your anger. It all has a terrifying face. It's almost impossible to believe that it's the same person sitting in front of me." The moment she said that, I understood and agreed. I really did hate myself. My mother died of illness when I was a child, and when I was a teenager, my father took his own life. I was unable to do anything for either of them, and I hated myself for it. That was definitely the start of it all. Before I started junior high, my grandparents on my father's side took me in, but they were all terrible people who demanded my parents' insurance money and were always cold towards me. Looking back on it now, what they did to me would now be called abuse. "It's your fault," they would say to me every single day. Of course, I hated them, but the resentment I felt towards myself was even stronger than that. The reason my mother didn't go to the hospital sooner was because of me. And once she was gone, things got even harder for my father. If I had been more knowledgeable about the world and more intelligent in general, then maybe my relatives would have looked at me differently. Looking back on it now, many of my close friends growing up met with misfortune. Maybe it was because I was jealous of them. They had families, a home to return to, and they'd never experienced anything like I had. They didn't know anything about the misery I'd experienced, and their futures would no doubt be bright as well. Even any friends I might make in the future as well. Of course, I understood that I was being unreasonable, but I still hated it. But most of all, I hated myself for being unreasonable in the first place. What happened to me wasn't exactly a cheerful story, and I didn't want to bother people with it, so I hadn't even told Yuka the full details of what happened. And so, I told them honestly. The three of them cried as they listened in silence, and after telling them how I really felt inside, I actually felt a little better. "Hey, can I ask my guardian spirit to protect him too, seeing as he's family now? Or maybe we could have someone perform an exorcism, although that might be a little difficult," Yuka said. "Honestly, I think it would be difficult getting the spirits protecting you to do the same for him. And as for an exorcism, well, I might be able to give you advice, but neither Haru nor I have that type of power. I'm sorry," Natsu-san said. "I'm sorry for making you relive such painful memories as well," Haru-san said. "I'll look for someone who can perform an exorcism right away. We got ourselves involved in this, so it's our responsibility as well." It was the first time I'd met either of them, and yet both sisters were so kind towards me. Once they're all spent, living spirits can return to their bodies or simply disappear as well. Because they are living, they need energy, and the stronger the thoughts behind them are, the stronger they are too. Until I find someone who can perform an exorcism, I'll see if there's anything else we can do to improve matters. I can see that you yourself are a kind person. We decided to call it a day there. Yuka and I were basically living together at the time, but I asked her to return to her own place for a while because it was too dangerous. I avoided contact with her for a while after that, moved out of my apartment as soon as I could, and then moved into the one I'm currently in. I haven't contacted Yuka since then, nor Natsu-san and Haru-san. It felt like I had to leave. I don't know whether that was something I felt myself or the other version of me made me feel. Either way, I try not to get close to people now. I've never even tried Twitter or blogging because I don't know whether that'll affect people either. That's why I just use Ni-channel and such, where my replies don't really matter. At any rate, if I don't get close to anyone, then I should be fine. I think. Maybe. I still have all that anger, resentment, and hatred that is built up within me. But I really do want to get close to someone. I want someone to save me. But I don't know what to do. I really hate myself. Mount Osore is one of the most sacred mountains in Japan, and for good reason. But when a group of friends head there one night for a little fun, they soon figure out that you shouldn't visit it in jest. Find out why in Mount Osore. Let me tell you a story about when I went to Mount Osore when I was a student. During an unforgettable summer during my second year at university, 5 of my friends and I had a little too much time on our hands, so we decided to go out and do a test of courage. Up until that point, we'd set off fireworks at a crematorium and drunk sake at abandoned buildings that were said to be haunted. "Hey Kay," one of my friends said to me, "where's the scariest place in all of Aomori?" "It's gotta be Mount Osore, no?" I replied straight away. And so it was decided. The 6 of us piled into his van and made our way from Hirosaki City towards Mount Osore. I remember that it was already past 9:30 p.m. by this point. We thought it would take us about 3 hours from Hirosaki to reach Mount Osore. By the time we passed through Aomori City on Highway 279, heading towards Shimokita, where Mount Osore is located, there were no more cars coming towards us. On that note, there was an old lady in a tattered kimono who was often seen on top of cars on that road. Even if it was just an urban legend, it wasn't exactly something I wanted to remember on an endless stretch of dark road. As the atmosphere grew heavy, my friend started telling a scary story. It was a fairly common story about how a friend of his was suffering from sleep paralysis and being hassled by a ghost. But for some reason, the fact this happened to his friend at the same time every single night, 2:14 a.m., really stuck with me. After passing through Mutsu City, we went down a road with a sign that said Mount Osore, and we found ourselves on a mountain road. There wasn't a single street light, and the road twisted and turned as we went up the mountain. As we approached a sharp curve, the car's lights shone on something. It was a bunch of Jizo statues all lined up. And each time we rounded a curve after that, there were more and more statues. We were starting to get scared. It was around 1 a.m. when we finally arrived. We parked the car and stood before a large gate, but it was tightly shut. At any rate, we took a photo to remember our trip by. We'd come all this way, so we didn't want to leave without at least trying to get in. So we walked around the area and found a simple wooden fence we could go through not too far from the gate. To be honest, at that point I was so creeped out by everything that I just wanted to go home right away, but everyone else went in. I didn't want to stay behind by myself, so I sadly followed them. After a short walk, we found what looked like a large temple. It was pitch black, so we had to rely on my friend's torch to see. As soon as we passed by the side of the temple, the world seemed to completely change. It was a creepy place full of nothing but rough, jagged rocks. Looking closer, there were numerous piles of small stones all over the place at our feet. I think they were piles that parents made for their children who died, right? But even creepier than that was all the windmills. Because Mount Osore was a volcano, the windmills blew in the sulfuric winds characteristic of volcanoes. Countless windmills spinning in the dark. Just looking at them made me want to turn back, but for some unknown reason, my friend M picked one of the windmills out of the ground. "Hey, I don't think you should do that," I said. "It's to remember our trip by," he said as he started walking again. Looking back on it, that was no doubt a terrible idea. After passing through the rocky area, we ended up on a normal path. It was so dark that, outside of the faint torchlight, we couldn't really see much. At any rate, we kept walking along the path. I was so scared that I tried distracting myself by talking to S next to me. But then, someone suddenly told us to be quiet. The 6 of us stopped on the spot. There was a sound that appeared to be both nearby and far away at the same time. A low sound, like chanting. It was at that point that I realized something. When you're honestly scared to death, you're unable to even scream. If someone had said something, anything, then no doubt we all would have flown into a panic. Everyone was so terrified that we couldn't move, but after a minute or so, the chanting surrounding us passed and gradually got further away. Silence. "Let's go home," someone said, and we were all silent on the way back. Once we got back to the car, everyone sighed in relief. My friend started the car, and once we took off, everyone inside looked exhausted. No one wanted to talk about what happened. Then suddenly, honestly right out of nowhere, the engine died. The car stopped. Everyone looked at S, the driver, but he was frantically turning the key over and over. The engine started again, but no matter how much he pressed on the accelerator, the car didn't move. The only thing we could hear was the rear tires spinning. Nobody said a thing. Nobody could say a thing. Suddenly, the clock by the driver's seat caught my eye. It said 2:14. Once the number changed to 15, the car suddenly started again. After that, everything went fine. We proceeded smoothly until we saw the lights of Mutsu City. "Well, that was terrifying," one of my friends muttered. The next day, we developed the photos we took by the gate, and there was a long streak of light cutting across us. And that was my experience at Mount Osore. Nothing bad happened to me after that, but I don't think you should visit that place just to mess around. And, as a local, I recommend you take that place seriously as well. If you've ever been there during the week, then you might know, but there's a promenade, or maybe a walking course would be a better word for it. There are statues of Jizo and Kannon on the way, and maybe you've seen an old lady bending down to give them offerings. She makes offerings to all the statues. When the Mount Osore Grand Festival is held, lots of people come to visit. For us, it's an important place not just for the living, but for the dead as well. And that's why you shouldn't go there to mess around. If you topple a pile of stones, or take home some sand from Jodogahama Beach, then you will undoubtedly be cursed. There are even stones with names on them. The thoughts and feelings of not just the dead, but the living as well, are concentrated on Mount Osore. Please don't go there to mess around. Please. It's a story as old as time. Someone gets locked in the school basement and nobody knows they're there. But is there any truth to this common urban legend? Find out in School Basement. This is a story from one of my old part-time jobs. I worked with a girl at the time who was rather dark. She was a silent, timid girl. Not my usual type, but we often spent a lot of time together, so I tried to chat with her when it was just the two of us. But well, the conversations weren't very exciting. We didn't seem to agree on anything. We didn't have a single thing in common. I liked to watch and play sports, but she had absolutely no interest. She was a gamer, but I had zero interest in video games. Our tastes in music were totally different too. Now, both of us did enjoy reading, but even then we enjoyed reading different things. I liked science, so I read books by Dawkins and Lorenz, while she enjoyed people like Nietzsche and Sartre. I was just like, who the hell are they? Still, reading seemed to be the only thing we had in common, so I continued with it. I like Rampo. Oh, me too. What about Kyoka? Yes. It went a little something like that. So you like scary stories? I asked. Yeah, quite a bit, she said. Me too, but I've never experienced anything scary myself. I once had a terrifying experience. Really? Well, tell me about it. Sure, but it's not about ghosts or anything like that. It's just kinda unpleasant. And with a nasty smile on her face, she started telling her story. It might be a little rude to say I expected no less, but apparently she was indeed bullied when she was in junior high, and it was a pretty rough time for her. One day after school, she ran to the old school building's basement, that is, the old music room, to escape her persistent bullies. Even for her, it was a pretty creepy place, and she was surprised herself by going there, but the more realistic threat of the bullies outweighed her fear of something far more vague that might be lurking there. Anyway, inside she found a door leading to another room. At that point, I wanted to jump in and ask if she really found a door, but how can I put it? The way she was talking was honestly frightening, and I didn't want to break the mood. But back to the story. Curious, she opened the door. It was unlocked. On the other side was a staircase leading even further down into the basement. Leaving the door open, she went downstairs. How brave. But on the way down, the door suddenly closed behind her. She almost fell down the stairs in surprise, but somehow she managed to stay upright. Panicking, she rushed back up, but when she pushed on the door, she pulled it on the other side to open it, it didn't budge. Just in case, she tried pulling it as well, but still, it stood firm. Thinking it might be the bullies, she screamed through the closed door. "Stop it! Let me out! Why are you doing this to me? Open the door!" Normally, this was when the bullies would start hurling abuse at her, but the other side of the door was silent. Maybe the door was made of metal so thick that you couldn't hear through it, she thought, and before she could stop herself, she was trembling and a cold sweat ran down her arms. If this was the work of the bullies, they had to let her out sooner or later. But what if the door really had closed all on its own? And what if nobody ever found her down there? Now, although the room on the other side of the door was a basement, it was still partly above ground, so there was a window. However, barely any light came in, so the room was still pitch black and she couldn't see anything. This darkness amplified her worries even more. She desperately banged on the door and screamed at the top of her lungs, but there was no response from outside. After trying futilely for a while, she went down the stairs and sat on the floor. And after calming down, she started to think of ways she could escape. It suddenly hit her that the door had to have a lock on the inside. If so, there was no way it couldn't be opened from the inside as well. It would be a bit of a problem if you couldn't open it from the outside, sure, but if you couldn't open it from the inside, well, that was a matter of life or death. The school facilities couldn't be that bad. With a calmness that surprised even herself, she decided to go back up the stairs. She traced the door with her hand to find the lock, but there seemed to be several places that were sticking out of it. Even so, there was nothing that appeared to be a lock. Then her leg hit something. No way. For a moment her imagination ran wild, but when she finally looked down, there was a torch at her feet. Relief washed over her. If it still worked, then it would be very useful. Without trying to get her hopes up, she fumbled around for the switch and tried to turn it on. Light emerged from the end. Oh, thank God. She shone the light on the door, but there, on the metal door, was the remains of some blood-stained fingernails and something scrawled in blood. "Help me," it said, covering most of the door. At that point, she stopped telling her story and laughed. Then she fell silent. After waiting a while, I finally mumbled in a hoarse voice. "And then?" "And then what?" "Well, I mean, I hadn't yet heard the most important part of the story." "Ah, you're wondering if I shone the torch on the floor and there was a skeleton there or something. Well, the story certainly would have been more scary that way, but I never saw anything like that. It was a real-life experience, so, that alone was pretty scary. Anyway, we should get back to work now." Wait, that wasn't it. She was missing the vital part. But I didn't get the chance to talk to her again that day. In fact, I didn't get the chance to talk to her ever again. She quit work that very same day without telling anyone. I heard from one of my friends that something like that happened at their high school. There was a spare science room or something in the basement, although it was barely ever used. 2 girls went down there for a test of courage, and a guard happened to notice that the door was open, so he closed it. I don't remember whether they were found dead or alive, but apparently they were so hungry down there that they ate the frog specimens and such. How sad. Be careful when driving on empty mountain roads. You never know what's lurking up there, and what you might bring back with you. Find out why in You're Going to Die. This happened during the summer 5 years ago. I visited my grandparents' house in Niigata with my mother. They lived in the middle of nowhere and there was nothing to do, so I was bored out of my brains. I decided to go for a drive and just see where I ended up, and next thing I knew, I was on a mountain road. I got a little carried away and started having fun doing a few crappy drifts. Before long, a person jumped out when I turned a corner. There was no possible way for me to avoid them, and I hit them. Panicking like mad, I stopped the car and went back, but there was nothing there. There were no scratches or blood on the car, and looking back on it, the impact didn't make a noise either. It was creepy, but I forced myself to accept that I had just imagined the whole ordeal and went back to my grandparents' house. The next night, I was once again bored with nothing to do. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened the day before, so I decided to go back to that mountain pass again. Everything was eerie and quiet, and there were no other cars around. When I arrived at the spot where I hit the person, I got out and looked around again, but nothing had changed. I was relieved. If I had hit someone, then my life would have been over. I got back in the car and drove back down the mountain, still feeling a little weirded out. I lit a cigarette and then looked in the rearview mirror. Something felt odd. I looked in the mirror again, taking my eyes off the road, and creepy eyes were looking at me through the mirror. I immediately looked back at the road and continued driving. There was no other traffic the whole way down. I continued driving towards the highway, and even just thinking about that situation now makes me tremble. At any rate, I arrived safely at a convenience store just off the highway. I read a few magazines at the rack until I finally calmed down, and then I decided to go home. But when I got back in the car, that weird feeling wouldn't go away again. Nervously, I looked in the mirror, but there was nothing. Did I also imagine those eyes? That's what I forced myself to believe, and then I arrived back at my grandparents' house again. I was so relieved, but when I turned the engine off, I heard a faint voice by my ear. "You're going to die," it said. I most definitely heard that. It wasn't my imagination. I told my mother everything, but she didn't believe me. And then, the next day, we returned to Tokyo. Even after we got back, my car still felt weird. I wanted to buy a new one, but I didn't have the money for it. I wanted to ask a medium to take a look at it as well, but I had no idea where to find one. After asking various people, I finally found someone who could introduce me to one. We went back to that mountain pass together so the medium could see for themselves, and they said that I was being haunted by the spirit of a young man who, it seemed, died in an accident there. The spirit was malicious and wanted to take me down with him. Once we got back to Tokyo, we could have the spirit exorcised, but it was so expensive. Apparently 2 million yen. But not like I could just say no, so I reluctantly agreed to it. You better watch yourself, medium. That shit isn't funny. When I asked my parents if they could lend me the money, they just looked at me like I was pathetic. Come on. And finally this week, a young boy explores a mountain next to his grandparents' house one day and comes across an odd snake that, well, might not actually be a snake after all. What could it really be? Find out in The Mountain Snake. This happened a long time ago, so there might be a few misunderstandings here and there, but well, please read it. When I was just a kid, around kindergarten age, I saw a rather strange snake. I had to move to the countryside from the city at the time, and I had this idea that kids from the countryside were always violent, so I refused to go to kindergarten there. Both my parents worked and were quite busy, so after a while, I ended up staying at my grandparents' house during the day. My grandfather was a hard-working man who dedicated his life to his farm work, so I always hung around my grandmother, who was very gentle and kind. She usually worked in the fields at the foot of a mountain, so I would play there and help her out sometimes. And so that was how I spent most of my time. One day, I decided to go up the mountain next to the fields. Normally, I would be too scared because of all the dense trees, but on this particular day, I was oddly curious. I snuck away from my grandmother when she wasn't looking, and then climbed a steep animal trail. At first, I was excited by all the large trees and insects I'd never seen before, but before long I grew tired and sat down on a rock to take a break. I drank some tea from my canteen and ate a few nuts from the nearby trees. Then I heard the snapping of some branches nearby and the peculiar sound of something slithering across the grass and dried leaves. Ah, it's a snake, I thought. I was used to seeing those in the fields. I looked around, wondering if it was a large Japanese rat snake, but there was nothing there. Then I suddenly realized something. There really was nothing there. No insects, no tanuki, nothing at all. At least some tiny winged insects would have been nice. It felt strange, but I was also happy there, so I didn't even think of going back. I think I sat there for quite some time, and then, suddenly, I heard a voice calling out to me. I immediately thought it was my grandmother. "Oh no, I'm here without permission," I thought, and quickly stood up. But at that same moment, a strange feeling enveloped me. How can I put it? It was kind of like the feeling you get when you finish watching a movie or reading a book. I also felt like I'd dropped something, but when I looked down at my feet, there was nothing. I only had my canteen with me to begin with. As I was thinking, I heard my grandmother's voice again and hurried down the mountain. I didn't get lost once, and when I arrived back at the fields, I screamed out, "Grandma!" She stepped out of the plastic greenhouse next to the field. "Oh? What's wrong? Do you want a tomato?" she said with a smile. "Huh? That's strange," I thought. "You're not angry?" I nervously asked. This time she looked at me strangely. Apparently she'd been working in the greenhouse all day and she hadn't even noticed I was gone. So, who did that voice belong to then? I was exhausted, probably from climbing the mountain, so all I wanted to do was go to bed. I think my grandmother sensed that too, and she started cleaning up. "Come on, let's go home." I helped her put things away, shouldered my backpack, and as I was about to leave, my grandmother looked at me in surprise. Well, more precisely, she looked behind me. I turned to see what she was looking at, and there was a snake on the border of the field and the mountain. It was poking up out of the ground like a spotted garden eel. I still remember what it looked like clearly. It was the biggest snake I've ever seen, and its body was green with what looked like white hairs on it. But the thing that stood out most was that it had no face. It was shaped like a snake, but it didn't have eyes or a mouth. As I stared at it, my grandmother whispered in a low voice I'd never heard her use before. "Don't move." I was oddly afraid of her, but I did as she said and didn't move, still turned around and looking at the snake. Before long, it disappeared back into the ground. I let out a big sigh of relief, thinking I was finally free, but then suddenly I started crying. I wasn't sad, nor was I crying from fear. But still, the tears wouldn't stop. We left without saying a word, but I'm pretty sure I cried all the way home. I never thought about climbing the mountain again after that, nor did I ever see the snake again. But strangely, when I try to bring up the topic of that snake with my grandmother these days, she says that she doesn't remember anything about it. What on earth was it? What a strange experience it was. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Cummy Tier members, Christina and S-. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Toshiden Theatre, Bite-Sized Japanese Urban Legends Volume 1, out on Amazon right now. And check out our newly revamped merchandise store at kawabana.store. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kawabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kawabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KawabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kawabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kawabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kawabana.net now.